122. After that initiation, the third point is sure to follow, the gaining of the further shore of that stream, in the attainment of adeptship, when the man leaves the merely human evolution, and enters upon that which is superhuman. We are told that after a man has entered upon the stream, it takes him an average of 7 incarnations to reach the fourth step, that of the Arhat, the noble, the venerable, the perfect. That period is more often lengthened than shortened, and the lives are usually taken without an intervening stage, in the heaven world. Ordinarily it is only men of this stage who are able thus to dispense with or renounce the life of the heaven world. 123. At the same time, those who are so happy as to be chosen to take part in the noble task for which the great masters are preparing us, that of working under the Manu in charge of the development of the sixth root race, will certainly need many successive incarnations without any intervening periods of celestial rest. The possibility of this is, however, conditioned by the rule that a man must have experienced celestial consciousness before he can renounce the heaven life. And furthermore, it is not in the least merely a question of voluntarily renouncing a reward, but of being sufficiently advanced to dispense for a time with that part of evolution which for the majority comes most usually in the heaven life. 124. When he stands upon the step of arhatship, half his path from the first initiation to adeptship may be said to have been trodden, for he has then cast off 5 of the 10 great fetters which hold men back from nirvana. Before him lies the task of casting off the remaining 5, and for that also an average of 7 incarnations is allowed, but it must be understood that this average is in no sense a rule, for many men take much longer than this, whereas others with greater determination and perseverance move through these initiations in very much less time. A case has been known in which, by beginning very early in life, and by working very hard, a man has been able to take all 4 of the great initiations in one incarnation, but this is excessively rare, and not 1 in 10,000 candidates could do it. 125. It will be remembered that to stand at the level of the Arhat involves the power fully to use the buddhic vehicle, and it will also be remembered that when a man raises himself into his buddhic body, the causal body vanishes, and he is under no compulsion whatever ever to reform it. Clearly, therefore, the 7 lives which remain to him before he reaches the level of adeptship need not involve a descent to the physical plane at all, and therefore they may not be what we ordinarily mean by incarnations. Nevertheless, in the great majority of cases they are taken upon the physical plane, because the man has work to do upon that plane for the great brotherhood. 126. The candidate spends these 14 lives in passing through the different stages of the path of holiness, and in acquiring all the qualifications which are described in detail in the concluding chapters of Invisible Helpers. One who becomes a disciple of one of our masters takes always, not the path to selfish liberation, the mere balancing of good and evil karma, and the vanishing of all desire, so that the man is no longer forced back into rebirth, but the path of renunciation, in which, having seen the scheme of the Logos, the man throws himself into it and lives only to promote the advancement of his fellow men. 127. This has been called the path of woe, because of the constant self-sacrifice which it involves, but in truth this title is somewhat of a misnomer, because, although it is true that there is suffering, it is always a suffering of the lower and not of the higher. And if the man should avoid such suffering by supineness or idleness, and leave undone the work which he might have done, there would assuredly be much greater suffering for him at a far higher level, in the shape of remorse. Such suffering as is inevitable in this path arises from the fact that the student is striving to do here and now in the fourth round what will be natural and easy in the seventh round. All our vehicles then will be much more developed, and even the very material of which they are built will be in an entirely different condition, because the physical atom will then have all its 7 spirally active instead of only 4 of them. Therefore, to force our present undeveloped vehicles to do work which will be comparatively easy for those which in millions of years will be fully developed, involves a great deal of strain, and this strain is necessarily productive of a certain amount of suffering. 128. It is analogous to the suffering and privation which is cheerfully undergone by an athlete when he puts himself in training. If he wishes to compete in some great race or trial of strength, he must make his physical body do more than it would naturally do, and deny it many things which it greatly likes, the absence of which unquestionably causes it considerable discomfort, and perhaps even somewhat of positive suffering. Yet for the purpose which he has in view the athlete quite cheerfully undergoes this. Indeed, if, for the sake of avoiding these comparatively slight temporary discomforts, he should put aside the opportunity of taking part in the race or contest, it is quite likely that afterwards, when he saw his comrades passing onward to victory, he would feel a remorse for that self-indulgence, which would involve keener suffering on a higher plane. The analogy holds good in reference to the efforts necessary to progress along the path of renunciation. The man who fell aside from that path because of its difficulties and hardships would undoubtedly suffer far more in the long run from remorse when he saw those of his fellow creatures going unhelped whom he might have aided, when he saw misery among them which he knew that he might have relieved if he had been less self-indulgent. 129. There is never any pain to the self, but only to these lower vehicles, when they are being prematurely adapted. A good analogy may be taken from the growth of crabs and other crustaceans. These creatures have their bones outside for protection, in the form of a shell, while our bones are inside, in the form of a skeleton. A fatal objection to the crustacean scheme is that when the creature grows it has to burst the shell, and then wait for another one to grow, which must be both a painful and inconvenient process. So in the process of our growth do we make about ourselves shells of thought, as though we were mental crustaceans. Presently the shell becomes too small, and then we make a long series of efforts to crowd the new growth inside it and make it do somehow. But in the end this always proves impossible, and we have painfully to burst it. This, however, is inevitable. So chafe not at karma, and at nature as changeless laws, for you made the shell yourself in the past, and now you yourself must break it. But if you did not go to the inconvenience of breaking it, you would suffer far more in the unsatisfied feeling that no progress had been made. 130. Many people are afraid of change, especially of a change of faith, and this arises not only from inherited prejudice, but also from actual fear of doubt. Fear that if one once lets go one may be unable to find mental anchorage anywhere. Many a man is quite unable to make rational defense of his belief, or to answer the problems which inevitably arise in connection with it, and yet he is afraid to let it go. Sooner or later he will have to let go, though the widening out of his faith is sure to be accompanied by pain. Truly there would be no suffering for us if we never broke our shells, but then on the other hand there would be no progress. 131. The life of the disciple is full of joy, never doubt it an instant. But it is not a life of ease. The work which he has to do is very hard, the struggle is a very real one. to compress into a few short lives the evolution of millions of years, the evolution for which the ordinary process of nature allows 3.5 rounds, is not a mere holiday task. Our president has written, "Disciples are the crucibles of nature, wherein compounds that are mischievous are dissociated, and are recombined into compounds that promote the general good." 132. It is not necessary for anyone to become such a crucible. Perhaps it would be nearer the fact to say that to become one is a distinction eagerly sought after. Nearer still to say that when once a man has seen the great sacrifice of the Logos, there is no other possibility for him but to throw himself into it, to do his tiny best to share in it, and to help it at whatever cost to his lower nature. And this is no childish play. It does indeed involve often a terrible strain. But an earnest student will be able to realize that a man may so love his work, and may be so full of joy in it, that outside of it there can be no pleasure worth considering, even though that work may tax almost beyond bearing every faculty, and every vehicle, physical, astral or mental, which he possesses. 133. It must be remembered that when humanity in general has this work to do and this evolution to accomplish, it will be far better fitted for the effort, and is the man who is trying now to take a shorter and steeper road. Many of his difficulties are due to the fact that he is attempting with a set of fourth-round bodies to achieve the result for the attainment of which nature will prepare her less adventurous children, by supplying them in the course of the ages with the splendid vehicles of the seventh round. Of course, even to gain those glorified vehicles, these weaker souls will have to do the same work, but when it is spread over thousands of incarnations, it naturally looks less formidable. 134. Yet beyond and above all his struggle, the pupil has ever an abiding joy, a peace, and serenity, that nothing on earth can disturb. If he had not, he would indeed be a faithless servant of his master, for he would be allowing the temporary strain on the vehicles to overbear his perception of the self within. He would be identifying himself with the lower instead of with the higher. 135. There is therefore a certain element of the ridiculous in describing this path as one of woe, when it is clearly evident that there would be much greater woe for the candidate if this path were not taken. Indeed, to the man who is really doing his duty, true sorrow is unknown. Never doth any who worketh righteousness, O beloved, tread the path of woe. Bhagavad Gita, vi. 40. 136. This is as regards the inner life of the disciple, but if one is to consider the treatment which he is likely to receive on the physical plane, the name of the path of woe is by no means inappropriate, at least if he has to do any sort of public work, in which he tries to help the world. Ruysbroek, the Flemish mystic of the 14th century, writes of those who enter upon the path, "Sometimes these unhappy ones are deprived of the good things of earth, of their friends and relations, and are deserted by all creatures. Their holiness is mistrusted and despised. Men put to bad construction all the works of their life, and they are rejected, disdained by all those who surround them, and sometimes they are afflicted with divers diseases." Remember, too, how Madame Blavatsky writes, "Where do we find in history that messenger grand or humble, an initiate or neophyte, who, when he was made the bearer of some hitherto concealed truth or truths, was not crucified and rent to shreds by the dogs of envy, malice, and ignorance? Such is the terrible occult law, and he, who does not feel in himself the heart of a lion to scorn the savage barking, and the soul of a dove to forgive the poor ignorant fools, let him give up the sacred science. The Secret Doctrine, III. 90. 137. The way in which the world usually treats a new truth is first to ridicule it, then to grow angry about it, and then to adopt it, and pretend that it has always held that view. In the meantime, the first exponent of the new truth has probably been put to death, or died of a broken heart. 138. It is in the course of the trading on this path that the consciousness of the candidate passes through the three halls mentioned in the voice of the silence. This term is used there to indicate the three lower planes. The first, that of ignorance, is the physical plane, upon which we are born to live and die, and it is very truly described as a hall of ignorance, for all that we know in it is the merest outside of things. The second, the hall of learning, is the astral plane, which is very truly the place of probationary learning, for when the astral centers are opened we see so much more of everything than we do on the physical plane, that at first it seems to us that we must indeed be seeing the whole, though further development soon shows us that this is not so. 139. But the voice of the silence warns us that beneath each flower in this region, however beautiful it may be, lies coiled the serpent of desire. That lower desire, which the aspirant must stifle in order that he may develop in its place the higher desire which we call aspiration. In the case of affection, for example, the lower, the selfish, the grasping affection must be altogether transcended, but the high, pure, and unselfish affection can never be transcended, since that is a characteristic of the Logos himself, and a necessary qualification for progress upon the path. What man should cast aside is such love as thinks always, how much love can I gain? How much does so and so love me? Does he love me as he loves someone else? The love which we need is that which forgets itself altogether, and seeks only the occasion to pour itself out at the feet of the loved one. 140. The astral plane is often called the world of illusion, yet it is at least one stage, and a very long stage, nearer to the truth of things than what we see on the physical plane. It often happens that men are easily deluded upon the astral plane, because they are as yet much in the position of babies there, newborn infants with no sense of distance, and no developed capacity for locomotion. We must not forget that in the normal course of things people very slowly awaken to the realities of the astral plane, just as a baby awakens to the realities of the physical plane. But those of us who are deliberately, and, as it were, prematurely entering upon the path are developing such knowledge abnormally, and are consequently more liable to error. 141. Danger and injury might easily come in the course of our experiments, but for the fact that all pupils who under proper training are endeavoring to open these faculties are assisted and guided by those who are already accustomed to the plane. That is the reason for the various tests which are always applied to one who wishes to become a worker on the higher planes. That is why also all sorts of horrible sights are shown to the neophyte, in order that he may understand them and become accustomed to them. If this were not done, and if he came across such a thing suddenly, he might receive a shock which would drive him back into his physical body, and this would not only prevent his doing any useful work, but might also be a positive danger to that body. Where the neophyte is deluded on the astral plane, it is his own fault, and not that of the plane, because error is due only to his unfamiliarity with the surroundings. 142. The third hall is the mental plane, the hall of wisdom. As soon as a man is free from attachment to astral things, he can pass beyond the probationary stage of his learning, and begin to acquire knowledge which is real and definite. Beyond that in turn lies the imperishable world of the Budkick plane. in which for the first time the man learns the true unity of all that to the lower vision seems to be separate. 143. It has been said, "Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself." As long as it is but a path to us, and we are following it according to directions received, or because we have seen it and chosen it with the intellect only, we have not truly entered it at all. This is only a stage, leading on to the condition, when you have become yourself the law and the path, and you fulfill its requirements, instinctively doing the right merely because it is the right, and because it is inconceivable that you could do anything else. Then only you have become the path. 144. A man cannot climb if he does not try, though if he does not climb it is true that he will not fall far. The strong man often makes serious errors, but the very force which enables him to make them also enables him to make great progress, when he turns his energies in the right direction. Rapid progress affects the whole organism, and is a great strain upon it, and this inevitably finds out whatever weak spots there are in the man. The plans of the hierarchy will be carried out whatever we may, or may not do, for we are but as pawns in the mighty game which is being played, but if we are intelligent pawns, and are willing to cooperate, it gives much less trouble to the authorities, and incidentally to ourselves. 145. And what will be the end of it all? The attainment of perfection. Yet even that is only relatively, and not absolutely the end, for when we have reached in fullness consciousness the logos of our system, and have unified our consciousness with his, there still remains the further path which leads us to union with still higher powers. A great authority has told us that at the end of one of the stages of evolution far beyond adeptship a perfect man will be a decad, having a body upon each of the subplanes of the lowest cosmic plane, the triple logos outside of time and space constituting his self, and thus completing the 10. But this consummation can only be reached when the man has power to create a body for himself upon each of these planes. 146. We have been led to understand that of the total number of egos which are engaged in this evolution, about 1/5 will fully succeed, that is to say, will succeed in attaining the Azekar level before the end of the 7th round. Another 1/5 will by that time have gained the Arhat level, and about an equal number will be on the lower stages of the path, while a number roughly stated as the remaining 2/5 will have dropped out of this evolution altogether at the critical period at the middle of the 5th round. 147. All those who have not fully attained the goal and completed their evolution will have to resume it upon the next chain of globes, and even those who are the failures of the 5th round will be successes in the next chain. In the same way, it is not improbable that some of those who are adepts and masters now may have been among the failures of the moon chain, that is to say, that they belonged to the humanity of that chain, but were somewhat backward upon it, and so dropped out there, and came on in the forefront of this later evolution. Exactly as a boy who failed to pass an examination 1 year would be likely to be among the first of his class when he tries the same examination again 12 months later. 148. Remember that we are now only just past the middle of an evolutionary period, and that is why so very few people comparatively have as yet attained adeptship, just as very few boys in a class would be already fit to pass the final examination of the year, after only 6 months of study. In precisely the same way, very few animals are as yet attaining individuality, for the animal who attains individuality is as far in advance of his fellows as is the human being who attains adeptship in advance of the average man. Both are doing at the middle point of evolution what they are expected to be able to do only at the end of it. Those who achieve only at the normal time, at the end of the 7th round, will approach their goal so gradually that there will be little or no struggle. 149. Undoubtedly to obtain in that way is very far easier for the candidate. But that method has the tremendous drawback that the man who obtains by it will not have been able to give any help to others, but will on the contrary have required assistance himself. I remember from the days of my childhood a Christian hymn which gave this idea very beautifully. It described how a certain soul went to heaven and enjoyed its bliss, and wandered about there very happily for a time, but at last he noticed that the crown which he wore differed much in splendor from many of the others, and for a long time he wondered why this was so. At last he met the Christ himself, and mustered up courage to ask him the reason of this peculiarity, and the answer given ran thus. 150. I know thou hast believed on me. 151. And life through me is thine. 152. But where are all those glorious gems? 153. That in thy crown should shine. 154. Thou seest yonder glorious throng. 155. With stars on every brow. 156. For every soul they led to me. 157. They wear a jewel now. 158. They that are wise shall shine, as the brightness of the firmament, but they that turn many to righteousness, as the stars forever and ever. 159. When we are struggling on words ourselves, we can help others, and we should do all that we can in this direction, not because of the result to ourselves, though that is inevitable, but for the sake of helping the world. The man who drifts with the stream has to be carried along, but when he begins to swim himself, he sets free the force that would otherwise have been spent in helping him. That can then be used for the helping of others, quite independently of what he himself may do in that line. 160. Adeptship sets the man free from the necessity of rebirth, and its achievement also involves the liberation of forces for the aid of others. The man who seeks liberation only for himself may balance his karma perfectly, and may kill out desire, so that the law of karma will not longer compel him to rebirth. But though he thus avoids the action of the law of karma, he does not escape from the law of evolution. It may be long before he comes under the influence of that law, because by the hypothesis a man who has already at this stage set himself free from all desire must be considerably in advance of the average. There will, however, inevitably come a time when the slow and steady advance of the law of evolution will overtake him, and then its resistless pressure will force him out of his selfish bliss into rebirth once more, and so he will find himself again upon the wheel from which he had hoped to escape. 161. It has often been asked how the secrets revealed at initiation are protected from those who are able to read thoughts. There is not the slightest danger that any of these secrets will ever be disclosed in this manner, for at the same time that the secret is told to the initiate, the means by which he can guard it is also explained to him. If it could be possible that an initiate could ever be so false as to think of betraying what has been confided to him, even then there would be no danger, for he is in such close touch with the brotherhood, of which he is a part, that they would at once know of his foul intention, and before he could speak the treacherous words he would have forgotten utterly that there was anything to betray. There is nothing that is in any way terrible about these secrets, except that the power which goes with them might well be terrible if wrongly used. Initiates always know one another, much in the same way as Freemasons do. And, just as with the latter, any initiate could hide his status from those below him, but not from those above him. 162. However sorely the brotherhood may be in need of helpers, no man can receive initiation until his character is developed to a stage when he is ready for it, and in exactly the same way, if a man has raised himself to the level of initiation, there is no power which can withhold it from him. It may very often happen, however, that a man is ready in every respect, save for a lack of some one quality, and that lack may hold him back for a very long time, which would probably mean that by the time he acquired the missing quality he would in all other respects be developed in advance of the requirements. So it must not be supposed that all initiates standing upon the same level are invariably equal in all respects. What the world calls a great man is not necessarily developed all round and fit for initiation. Anything in the nature of favoritism or neglect is utterly inconceivable. In this matter no man can give to another that which he has not earned, nor can any man withhold the recognition of development. 163. 164. The Ancient Mysteries. 165. What I can tell you with regard to the ancient mysteries is not derived from any special study of old manuscripts or of the history of this subject. It happened to me in another life to be born in ancient Greece, and to become initiated there into some of the mysteries. Now a man who was initiated in this way in Greece gave a pledge not to reveal what he had seen, and this pledge is binding, even though it was given in a former incarnation, but those who stood behind those mysteries have since thought fit to give out to the world much of what was then taught only under the vow of secrecy, and so they have relieved us from our promise as far as those teachings go. Therefore I break no pledge when I tell you something about the instructions which were given in those ancient mysteries. Other subjects were taught, however, which I am not at liberty to name, because they have not yet been made public by the great ones. 166. In the first place, I should like to ask you to notice that all peoples and all religions have had their mysteries, including the Christian religion. I have often heard people say that in the Christian religion, at least, nothing was hidden, that everything was open for the study of the poor and the unlearned. Anyone who says that does not know the history of the Christian Church. Now, indeed, everything the Church knows is given out, but that is only because it has forgotten the mysteries which it used to keep hidden. If you study the earliest history of the Church, you will find that old writers speak very distinctly of the mysteries which were taught only to those who were full members of the Church. There were many points on which nothing was said to those who were only catechumenoi, who had just entered the Church, but were still candidates for full membership. 167. Traces of this we can find still earlier. For you will remember that it is said in the Gospels that the Christ made known to his disciples many things which he gave to the multitude only in parables. 168. But one of the reasons of the failure of the Christian Church to control her more intellectual sons as she should have done is the fact that she has forgotten and lost the supernatural and philosophical mysteries which were the basis of her dogma. To see something of this hidden side of her teachings you have only to read the works of the great Gnostic writers. Then you will find that when we take this side as the inner doctrine for the scholars, and the present form of the Christian religion as the outer doctrine for the illiterate, We get in the two combined a perfect expression of the ancient wisdom. But to take either of these teachings by itself, and to condemn the other as heresy, gives us only a one-sided view. So every religion has instruction for those who do not get beyond its outer form, but has always also higher instruction for those who penetrate to the inner. 169. However, when we speak of the ancient mysteries, we generally mean those which were connected with the great religion of ancient Greece. Only a few books exist on this subject. There is a book of I.M. Leech's, who was himself initiated into the mysteries, and there is a book written by a countryman of mine, Thomas Taylor, a Platonist, and also one by a Frenchman, Monsieur P. Foucard. Although they are very interesting, you will find that they give but little real information. Much that we think we know about the mysteries, I mean from an external point of view, comes to us through the writings of their exponents. 170. The Christian Church has had the habit, probably justifiable from her point of view, of destroying all books which stood for teachings other than her own. And we must not forget that almost all of our knowledge with regard to early Christian times comes to us through the hands of the monks of the Middle Ages. They were practically the only educated people of that time, and it was they who copied all the manuscripts. They had very pronounced opinions about what was useful and what was not, so very naturally only that part survived which agreed with their views, this being reported with emphasis, while anything of opposite character was discarded. Above all, the greater part of the knowledge which is accessible to the general world about the mysteries is found in the works of the Church Fathers, who were opposed to them. Without wishing to accuse the Fathers of having purposely misrepresented, we may certainly conclude that they tried to put forward their own view in the best and strongest light. Even at the present day, if you wish to know the whole truth concerning the doctrine of some Protestant sect, you would not go to Catholic priests for information, nor, if you wanted good and just explanations concerning Catholicism, would you go to the Salvation Army to get them. 171. In regard to the mysteries, we are in a similar situation, only much worse, because of the many and bitter disputes between the followers of the old religion and its mysteries, and the fathers of the Christian Church. Therefore we may accept only with considerable reserve, and with great prudence, what the fathers say in regard to this subject. For example, you will find that they often maintain that the ancient mysteries contain much that is indecent and immoral. 172. Because I have carefully searched clairvoyantly through the mysteries of Greece, and in a former incarnation was myself an initiate of them, I can say with perfect certainty that there is not even a shadow of truth in those statements. There did exist certain mysteries with which were festivities, and a form of Bacchus worship, which degenerated later on into something very objectionable, but this was only in later times, and those mysteries belonged to quite another branch. They were not in the least related to the mysteries of Eleusis, but were only an imitation of them on a small scale, entirely exoteric. 173. I have, this evening, to treat a very extensive subject in a short time. I must try to give you a rough sketch of what those Greek mysteries were, and what was taught to the initiates. 174. The fact will be known to you that two divisions are always mentioned, the lesser and the greater mysteries. Everybody knew that those existed, and the number of persons who were initiated was indeed quite a large proportion of the whole population. I think you may read in exoteric books of 30,000 initiates gathering at one time, and this also shows that the fact that a man was initiated need not be kept secret, but that the outer world knew him as belonging to this numerous class. I mean that, although certain teachings given in the mysteries were always kept secret, the whole Greek and Roman world knew that the greater and lesser mysteries existed, and more or less who belonged to each of them. 175. But behind those 2 degrees, the existence of which was generally known, there were all the time the real secret mysteries, and the existence of the 3rd degree, as one might call it, was unknown to the public. If one thinks of the conditions of that time, one can readily understand the reason for this. Most of the Roman emperors, for example, knew of the existence of the lesser and greater mysteries, and insisted upon being initiated. Now we know very well from history that many of the Roman emperors were hardly of the character to be allowed to play a leading role in a religious body. But, all the same, it would have been very difficult for the leaders of the mysteries to refuse entrance to an emperor of Rome. As was once said, one cannot argue with the master of 30 legions. The emperors would certainly have killed anyone who stood in the way of anything they wished. Thus it was desirable that the existence of the 3rd degree should not be known, and nobody knew that there was such a degree before he was deemed, by those who could judge, worthy to be admitted to it. 176. The teachings of this 3rd degree were never given to the public, and never will be. But in the common mysteries, lesser and greater, are many things which can be told. In the first place, then, we were taught certain pithy sayings, or apophthegms, and if I quote you some of those you will understand the nature of the teaching. One of the best known was death is life, and life is death. This shows us that the higher life on the other side of death was well known. Another saying was, he who seeks realities in this life shall also seek realities after death, and he who seeks unrealities in this life shall also seek unrealities after death. A great principle of their teaching was that the soul had descended from the higher spheres to the material. The principles of reincarnation were also contained in their instruction. You will remember that this did not appear in the external doctrine of the religions either of Greece or of Rome. That is to say, it was not taught publicly, and in so many words, but you will find that this idea of the descent of the soul into matter is imported in classic mythology. You will remember the myth of Proserpina, who was carried to the underworld while picking the flower of the narcissus. 177. Let us recall the myth of Narcissus. He was a youth of great beauty, who fell in love with his own image reflected in the water, and was therefore changed into a flower, and bound to earth. You need not have studied much theosophy to see what that means. We learn in the secret doctrine how the ego looks down upon the waters of the astral plane and the lower world, how it reflects itself in the personality, how it identifies itself with the personality, and, falling in love with its image, is bound to earth. So Proserpina, while picking the narcissus, is dragged away to the underworld, and afterwards passes half her life under the earth and half on the earth, that is, as you will see, half in the material body, and half out of it. 178. In the same way, there are numbers of other myths of which it is very interesting to hear the theosophical explanation. For example, in this old mystery teaching, the Minotaur was held to signify the lower nature in man, the personality which is half man and half animal. This was eventually slain by Theseus, who typifies the higher self, or the individuality, which has been gradually growing and gathering strength, until at last it can wield the sword of its divine Father, the Spirit. guided through the labyrinth of illusion which constitutes these lower planes by the thread of occult knowledge given him by Ariadne, who represents intuition. The higher self is enabled to slay the lower, and to escape safely from the web of illusion, yet there still remains for him the danger that, developing intellectual pride, he may neglect intuition, even as Theseus neglected Ariadne, and so fail for this time to realize his highest possibilities. 179. In ancient Greece, the lesser mysteries were especially celebrated in a little place called Agre, and the initiates were called Mysti. Perhaps you know that their official dress, the token of their dignity, was the skin of a fawn, which in the old symbology represented the astral body. 180. Its spotted appearance was thought to be emblematic of the many colors in an ordinary astral body. The reason why this was considered a fitting dress for those initiated into the lesser mysteries was because the principal teachings given in them concerned the astral plane. Those who were admitted learned what the astral life of man would be after death,